Okay, go ahead and call this meeting to order. Welcome, everyone. Welcome. How are you?
Good.
Yeah, good. Okay. So let's go. And would anyone like to read the plan acknowledgement? I can read it. We'd like to acknowledge we are the traditional land, a rich and diverse group of neighbors who have called this area home for more than 10,000 years. We honor with gratitude the land itself and the descendants of these native peoples who are still here today. Okay, any questions about the agenda or additions or?
Just one update. Meredith Lavani has been in a caretaking situation in family graduations. Is missing tonight, but she'll be back in July. Cherie couldn't make it tonight. May appear remote if she can finish some work. And John Drew had hip surgery. It's just this group tonight.
And according to John's email, he's doing well.
Yeah.
So speedy recovery to John.
Hey, I can't fully see who's on the screen. Is that Marty over on my screen left? Yeah, okay, cool. Thank you.
Yeah.
This one's taller. Arms stay in place too.
Okay, so agenda, is there anyone who would like to approve the agenda or?
So moved.
So, okay.
Second.
Thank you, Yanni. All in agreement?
Right.
All right, then, minutes from the May 12th meeting, commission meeting, any changes, anything that he's also that needs, any updates required?
You know, the one thing that caught my attention there was I don't feel like if somebody actually wants to read the minutes and not watch the video, we don't, we even made some changes to options 1 and 2 and reworded them and then we voted on them. I think we should be spelling those out. So I don't have that written up right now. And last meeting I was also remote. But it just feels like we should say these were options 1, 2, and 3, and this is where we landed. We reported the vote. Let's make sure we record what the votes were about.
So in addition to option 1 being in the notes, you'd like to see option 2 and 3
Yes.
dated as well? Okay.
Yeah. And I apologize. I wish I'd brought it up earlier, but I didn't get to the notes until this afternoon. So it is what it is. But
Okay.
I'd like to see those spelled out.
Okay, and just so you all know, I did update the PowerPoint presenter, the slides that we used at the last meeting, and I sent those to you, and those do have the updates. So
Great.
we easily transfer that to the notes.
Great.
And those slides were, the revised slides were pointed out and shared with the entire council.
Did y'all hear that? There's some noise in the background, so I don't know if you. Okay.
I almost heard the whole sentence. Can you repeat that, Mark?
The original set of slides and then the revised slides were shared with the entire council.
No, that's great. I'd still like to see the options just kind of briefly, the way we saw them on a slide, just have those pasted in to the notes so that we can, be a little more transparent about what we discussed and what we decided.
Okay.
Thank you.
Anything else? Any other suggestions? Okay, so with those additions that Yanni's suggesting, options 2 and 3 being stated in the minutes, is there a motion to accept the notes? Well, is it okay if we accept them as is, with knowing that we will include those?
If you're comfortable, yeah.
Yeah.
It was pretty clear, matches the slides. We don't have to bring them back. If you're comfortable as a group with that.
Yep.
Okay. So is there a motion to accept the notes?
So moved.
So moved. Okay. Second. All in agreement? Okay. Thank you. All right. So our meeting dates. Our next meeting would be July. I don't have the calendar from here.
It's the second Tuesday, so this month gives us a little room. July first is a Wednesday, so seems like a little longer than normal, but that's why.
I will miss the July meeting. I'll be traveling.
As will I.
I could make it, but at this point, would we have the meeting?
Now, if we have no items, that makes it real easy. If we have items that are pressing and you want to look at rescheduling, that's an option too.
Depending on like what's happening today in our working session, we could just do a remote working session, you know, like asynchronously rather than a synchronous meeting in July, if that works for everybody.
I could definitely do an online or
Yes.
just touch base then.
If you have a quorum, we must follow.
Oh, that's right. That's right.
Yeah,
But a subcommittee or.
if exactly, if we had a couple
Okay.
of subcommittees on something.
So why don't we do this? Let's go ahead and
Yeah.
have our conversation this evening and we'll come back to it. Determine if we need a July meeting.
Yep.
Although poor Meredith, she's ready to come back and if we don't have a meeting.
She is, but yeah, she might need one more. She didn't want to be gone too.
Okay. Okay, and no public hearings, of course, public comments we don't have. Is there, oh, we don't have.
Nobody, oh man, we don't do online yet.
Yeah, okay. And is City Council Member Josh?
I thought he would be here.
Yeah, he's on screen.
Oh, is he? Okay.
Oh, yeah, sometimes if you don't talk, your picture doesn't go up. Let me bring this up.
And Yanni and Sam, if we don't see you raising your hand or anything, just call out Ken.
Absolutely.
We'll shake our fists and
You're big enough up there, you should see your faces up there, so it's we should see it.
Well, I'm here, as you can tell from the baby crying in the background. I just set her down a second ago, so just getting myself to a place where you won't hear too much crying behind me.
Actually, I don't think I hear anything. Do y'all hear anything?
Oh, I thought I heard feedback over the microphone, but maybe not. Let's see if I can work the camera on. But sorry I couldn't be there in person. It's the end of the school year, and there's concerts and too many people in too many different places. But glad I could be here tonight. Well, I feel like there's always a lot that's happened since we last met. There was the town hall, where I know several of you were there, and asked a very helpful question for the group, and kicked us off pretty early on. A lot of good questions, including some. I did refer some folks to you all for further conversation about the way that reasonable use exemptions have played out in the city. There's contention about it and concern. So as part of the critical areas update that you guys are doing, I suggested they bring some of their comments to this body for more conversations here. That was the first of what I hope will be many community conversations over time, but certainly over the next few months, as we later this week possibly move towards another round of levy lid lift conversations. Council's been doing a lot of work trying to sort of zero in on what that might look like to do. The budget situation overall has not changed since last year because the vote didn't change anything. So the conversation is shaping up in largely the same direction that we all saw last year. We'll see what the vote is this week, or possibly at a special meeting sometime soon. But whatever, if we're going to have something on the November ballot, which is where the conversation is, that will have to be completely buttoned up in July. And so council will need to give clear directions in time for staff to have it all be ready to lay out for the ballot and everything else. So that's moving along. That's an ongoing conversation. And obviously, if you guys have feedback, or if you hear things out in the community that would be useful feedback as we get that rolling, please do pass that along. We'd love to hear it and love to have you sharing your understanding of the city's overall state with the community in that way, in ways that are constructive. I think this was after our last meeting. Council adopted our Affordable Housing Week proclamation. We also did which is always timely. I got to cast our 1.6 votes at the PSRC, the Puget Sound Regional Council annual meeting, which all of the different cities vote. So, Seattle gets like 300 votes, and I cast 1.6 on behalf of Lake Forest Park. All of the votes were unanimous. So, but it was fun to be there. We got an address by Mayor Wilson. County Executive Zahalai was also there, and then about half the people had to clear out because it was the same day that Sound Transit was having their vote on what to do about the enormous deficit that they're running and how to reprioritize their action plan. So all the people who were on that board had to clear out as soon as the business ended. But there was a vote on the regional transit plan, which they have to do some things that qualify them for federal grants, some of which ultimately flow back to us, so it's nice to see that moving ahead. And I'm not sure how that intersects with the transit work that you all have on your work plan, but it all comes back to the same place, as does the city's transportation improvement plan, which we had a hearing for, I think, 2 weeks ago, which one person came and from Shoreline to give a comment about how we should fix Perkins Way, which we should do. But that's going to be fantastic. If you haven't checked out the presentations and the materials on that, please do. I'm really excited about what the Development Works Director Heaton has been laying out for that, and I think it's a lot of things that we've heard from the community for just decades in some cases that I think we're going to see movement on. So that's really encouraging. Also at the PSRC meeting, there was a panel. PSRC has hired some consultants to talk about regional competitiveness, and the consultants had identified, and then there was a roundtable with some business leaders, including people from leader from Morgan Stanley and Eric Nordstrom and Brad Smith from Microsoft, all laying out what they see as the challenges for the broader region, and affordability and housing was way up at the top of their list also. So it's and we also had a presentation from KCRHA, which I think I may have talked about last time, but all of it sort of coming back to that same theme. So I'm really excited to hear what you guys are going to pick up to work on. I'm trying to think, what are the other? I'm still in bedtime mode, so I'm probably forgetting something important. Last time we talked about the City Hall closing on Fridays, and I did confirm that's not changing. No, I don't think that's changed anyone's working hours. I think that was a question that had come up. And some people will be working in the building, but just the doors won't be open. And so that reduces a whole bunch of costs that go along with that. And that's the first of what may be many other steps in order to just close that overall structural deficit that is imposed by the way that the state does property taxes. So keep an eye on that, but hopefully we can have good, productive community conversations and figure out a path forward. So I think that's. Oh, and I did after our last meeting, did sort of summarize the discussion that you all had about the future for affordability, and the council discussion that came out of that. There were council members that wanted to have some follow up. I stuck up for you all. I said, I think that you guys are working towards something that you all had sort of had to put on a back burner due to other deadlines, and that I want to give you space to wrap that up. But I think council, there was an overall sense of urgency to go bigger, not structurally, but conceptually, and possibly also in structures, but in as expeditious a way as can be. So a hope that the components of option one that can be moved through can be moved off the table, and then start looking at some of what might fall into options 2 and 3. And there's a council subcommittee that's going to get together and try to talk about what our vision of that might look like, and continue this conversation that we had in the joint meeting and in others as that unfolds. So certainly want to know where you would like to go with that as well, but we'll tee up on our end as well and see what overlaps. And I believe that was the other thing that I know I wanted to mention. I think, trying to think if there's anything else that's been, I mean, everything's important, but I think that gives you a sense of what we've been doing for the last month and what's on the horizon.
Questions for Mr. Rosenau?
I have a question, Josh. So, you mentioned council wanted to sort of like make some decisions and they're waiting for us to like recommendation or a proposal. What's the deadline? Like, what is there a specific date the council members are looking for, like the subcommittee?
The subcommittee hasn't met yet to set that, and I would imagine that'll be a dialogue between y'all and us about how much time you feel like you need in order to move through some of those parking lot items and do that cleanup and not feel like it's rushed or half done. But I think the sense, there was no deadline set, but just a general sense of urgency.
And what do you think that urgency represents? What is it what's the concern?
I'm part of the concern, and I mean, one of the things that I talked about was just when I was talking there was some of the math that I had run through a little bit in a question that I asked during our last meeting of just, when I talk to developers, when I look through just sort of how the cost of a piece of property and then the cost of building something on it, and what can conceivably pencil out to hit almost any target for affordability as a percentage of AMI, it's very hard to, with what we allow in current code, it's hard to hit almost any of those targets. And if we want to see those sorts of things being built, I mean, for me, speaking personally, I think about, I've got a kid going into high school next year, presumably off to college after that. Will there be apartments that he can come back to, or other, starter homes that he'll be able to come back to town in? Are there things that my parents-in-law who live in town can downsize into, as if they've got some health issues? Are there places that they can downsize to and still stay as part of the community? The options that we have for that are quite limited, and the options for developers to build that are quite limited right now. So that's, I mean, for me, that's where my urgency comes from, and I think for others, it is similar individual concerns, and also just a sense that we are part of this regional challenge that everyone has to do their part to. All of our communities have to do their parts to try to get affordability under control and to make sure that our community lives up to the promises that we've. It's going back to that original the original pamphlet, right? That it's not a playground for 500 millionaires, but that it really should be something where people can afford to come and raise a family.
So it sounds like the conversations that some of the council members are having is paralleling the conversations that we've been having. Right? It's similar. I mean, we've been questioning what is affordability in this community.
Yeah.
And can that actually be achieved?
Yeah, and I think it was, and for some of the council members, I think it is also a sense that, that it's a long running conversation and they would love to not end it, but at least bring it to a resolution, at least in the near term, that tees up maybe future work as opportunities present. But not to let it linger, to move with some with deliberation, but not.
Yeah, makes sense. Makes sense.
Is that, Mark, is that what you were hearing in the room?
Yes. And from staff's point of view, the only timeline other than that is that it's an item on the 2026 work plan.
So there's a deadline in a sense.
In a sense, I mean, it was never anticipated to be completed in the book, done, signed off, successful. But some body of work for this item is anticipated. So it's pretty flexible.
And I think part of the conversation also that happened that I don't know was, I would need to look back at the notes. I don't think that we fully resolved where we stand on this, but the question of, does it need to be a sort of complete body of work, or is it something that can come more piecemeal? I think I said things in favor of piecemeal, but I don't want to represent that as the consensus that everyone landed at. I think there was openness to that, and I think if there are things that we can sort of lock down that make those future decisions easier, then that makes sense. And some of this will all sort of have to move as a piece. I'm sure that in order to get one thing to work, other pieces have to be in place also. But for instance, if option one can be moved off the table in a reasonably complete state to tee up those further discussions, and there are also much bigger conceptual things that on the council retreat last time. One of the items that had come out of it was the possibility of reducing the number of zoning categories, and I think that there had been some planning commission discussion about what that might look like. But is that may simplify some of the other work that you may take on, but it's not a necessary prerequisite for anything else. It may just make a lot of other things easier, but may not be something that has to happen in order, right? The sequencing of it might be separable, but to have the R9600 and the R10000, do we need both of those, or could we maybe just have one or the other? Could we simplify that down into sort of a general residential category and what I think they refer to as a conservation residential, where it's larger lots with funnier topography, weirder circumstances that will likely need different rules. I know that that's an idea that had been kicked around. There are some other things, and I think that some of that also came out of the what was the consultant's report? I don't have the name stuck in my head. Leland, yes. Yeah. I think that they had sort of talked about a version of that with some of the lot coverage rules, of separating out some of the places where there was not 50% of a lot that would be buildable, and not worrying about trying to increase lot coverage there, but that there were other lots where it might make reasonable sense. But all of this is, these are the sorts of things that we can all work together and sort of try to figure out what the bites are that we can take in reasonable time, and what we need to think about a little bit more and do a little bit more conversation and outreach, perhaps.
Sure. I just want to clarify though. So the council's having this conversation, right? So you're talking about zoning changes, potential zoning changes, right? So you're having that conversation. Is there, under the umbrella of affordability, which is what we're all concerned about, or
sure,
housing diversity, what is the end goal that you are all having? Why is that conversation happening? Is it that you're trying to solve a problem in the moment, or is it just because the conversation came up and you've been talking about this? I'm just trying to kind of get my head around, like, where's the council going with this conversation, besides talking about a subgroup,
right?
The next step.
Um, I'm not. I'll try to answer. I may not be understanding the question, and
Okay.
but I think in general, this is a conversation that I mean, I certainly in canvassing and campaigning, I certainly heard a lot of people who had similar concerns to what I mentioned before of either just looking at the price of their own home since they moved in and realizing that Lake Forest Park would be but 5 years later, Lake Forest Park might be unaffordable for them now, and thinking about kids, thinking about seniors, thinking about who's going to be able to move into neighboring houses as they become available. Is it a community that is still a community for them? I think that's almost existential question is on a lot of people's minds, and the broader affordability conversation in all of its iterations comes up a lot. I mean, it's certainly something that we're hearing from a lot of different angles, including within the community, but also our broader context in the region. When KCRHA came to present, they were pointing out that the fastest growing demographic of people who are unhoused for the first times in their lives are senior citizens. There's a problem, and it's a regional problem. It's not a Lake Forest Park only problem by any means, but it is a problem that we are part of and that we need to do our part in addressing. So I think that it is those sorts of things that are driving it. And I think in terms of sort of what the metric of success is, I think some of it is things that are in the comp plan. I think a lot of this is conversations that you all have had and that the community has had in terms of making sure that we have, the comp plan talks about workforce housing, it talks about starter homes, and the fact that while we're on track for our growth targets, we're not on track for those smaller units that generally don't exist in Lake Forest Park and have not been being built, which that's the missing middle. And so figuring out ways to hit those targets and to hit the affordability targets that and the affordability profile that we would like to see to continue to maintain the character of the community.
Josh, I have a question. I'm still having a hard time understanding the relationship with affordability question and work with zoning. Like, what's the link? Are you trying to, like, what is that has to do with zoning?
There are a few different ways that it can overlap, but the simplest is in those pure sort of math terms of if it costs $1 million to buy a lot, and I actually one of these days I will share this with you all. I requested from Arch, which is the affordable housing developer who works with a number of neighboring communities, including Kenmore. I asked them if they had sort of pro formas or other breakdowns of the cost of development, and they shared the numbers that they used for modeling on Kenmore's behalf for what it costs for them to build affordable housing there. And so it's $1 million-ish median to buy a property in Lake Forest Park. I don't have the numbers, and I'm talking to you on my phone, so I don't have the spreadsheet in front of me. But between hard costs and soft costs and a little bit of profit, 15% profit margin up front, you have to sell whatever you build in aggregate has to sell for ballpark $2 million. So as a single family house, you've produced something that's available to about 500% of area median income for a family of four. If you make that a duplex, now you've got two $1 million duplexes, which has.
Oh,
Did we lose them?
dope.
Okay, right.
Yeah. So I heard it. I think it was on NPR. Seattle is the 5th fastest growing city in this country again. Yep, which is crazy.
And again, we're not Seattle. I wanna.
Not Seattle,
Sure,
but people are
realize.
looking to move out of Seattle because of all this influx into. Yeah.
like people when they move out of Seattle, they look for like, what
Exactly.
kind of place do I want to live in? So there's certain features that you're looking for when you move out of Seattle.
Right.
You know, like, do you want walkability and you want a lot of peace and quiet and like all of those things that come with it. You want more space for your children, like, you know, there are things around that.
Right. We're back.
Go, the chat's with Yanni, so if he turns off his camera, then audio is better. And the liaison's not quite back yet. Okay.
Yanni, we got your message then, that's okay. Why don't we move on? And we can come back.
Yeah, well, I was gonna just ask the question of, the zoning is part of it though, like in terms of simplifying, permitting and things like that, that's tied to it, right? So it's
Yeah.
related, but, you know.
Yeah, diversity,
Mhm.
so lot sizes. The number that can be built, density. Heights, obviously. And all those factors have to be met.
I guess I differentiate between code and zoning, right? Like he talked about simplifying zoning, and that's what I'm trying to say. Like,
Yeah.
if there are like 7 different zoning spaces that we have, like what like it's less always about affordability. It's usually about like lot sizes, commercial versus residential, different topography. So like that's what I'm not sure. Like I understand like the code part, but like the zoning simplification. Josh, do you want to continue? Is that
We can, is there anything else that you want to say about that, Josh, at this point, or? He may not be there.
Frozen.
yeah?
I think he's frozen again.
Okay, let's go ahead and move
Hi,
on.
sorry,
Uh-oh.
Josh, if you turn off your video, we might be able to hear your audio better.
all right, let's try that.
Yeah,
Nice.
much
All
better.
right. So yeah, I came back in the middle of conversation. I don't need to cut that off, but I mean the on the simplest level, what densities we allow, how much of a lot you can build on, how much missing middle housing we can provide on existing lots, since there are no we can't make
Oh, we lost you again.
more land, and most of the lots that have buying a property across the number of properties that are available.
Josh, I think you're cutting it in and out.
All right, sorry.
Yeah.
All right, well, but it's yeah, these are important and ongoing conversations. We can continue them for sure,
And thank you.
and take them up individually as well.
All right. Should we move on?
Yes.
Thank you, Josh. So you that's not okay. So we're gonna go on to old business, which is the critical areas art ordinance update. Actually, so before we do that, because he just stepped out, the affordable housing proclamation, Josh. Have any of you?
Yeah.
Read it? Where's that? Is that posted right now?
It's on the agendas and minutes under
Okay,
last
okay, so
council meeting.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
in the back end.
Big business critical areas ordinance update.
Thank you. 3 parts. The easiest part is we always want to provide the opportunity for questions, comments, direction, inquiry, and free flow of discussion. We don't know where this is going. We want everyone to be on the same page, brought up to speed, and we all come from different backgrounds and experiences. So however staff can help with that, we encourage you to explore, ask questions, and let us know what you need. So that's part of this. This will be a long effort. This is not a quick matter by any means. This first part is to investigate what we need, what's in there, and what needs amending. And so the second part tonight is the checklist. The Department of Commerce has a voluntary checklist that jurisdictions like us can do to inform. Voluntary necessarily means let's do it. So in that sense, it's something normally that we RFQ for, have a consultant on board. Part of that scope of work is to do this checklist and let us know the exact scope of work of what's intended to be amended. The reason for that is then it's means tested, right? People can comment on it. We want to do it one time. We want to hit it. So does it comply with GMA? Does it comply with all the regulations in WAC and RCW? Has everyone had an opportunity to suggest what the amendments or exploration should be? The end result being a acceptable, non-challenged, non-appealed critical area ordinance. For us, it's a simple matter of, does it reflect our local values? Is it consistent with the comprehensive plan? So in that regard, we're starting from a very high point. A lot of cities start much lower and have to build that strength into it. I'm not seeing that. So what I'm offering is to start down this road at the staff level, because we know what's in there, figure out what we need through this checklist and means test it broadly, starting with tribes and so forth, whoever would like to read it, share it with Department of Commerce staff and anyone else that can inform us. Then start working on a scope of work that covers that range. We may not have all the funds, but by approaching it this way at a local organic staff level, we're saving money in that regard. We know what's in there. We know how to outreach. We can reach people through city council and state coordinated. When we did the comprehensive plan update, the climate element, and with all the grant funds, we didn't need to do that. The consultant came in and did it for us. We had the bandwidth. So for this, we've partitioned off a lot of staff resources, primarily me, to see how far we can get. I anticipate at some point we're going to need expertise, and we would be an advantage at that point to know exactly what that is and pay for or hire only that. So that's the overall outlook. And then the third item for discussion tonight is the proactive early communication with a series of tribes, not just one, out of respect. And so I have in the materials the webpage for Department of Commerce that goes into when it's required. Nothing says we can't do more. But what I'm seeing in those materials is that this is not comprehensive plan. This is not multi-county planning policies. So if someone were to say, are we required to do this? The instrument is that when we have a draft ordinance late in the process, that has to go to Commerce. They distribute it to all the state agencies and the tribes that have signed up for that. That's as Johnny has pointed out, it's very late in the process. It's already can be seen as baked in. So voluntarily, we can consider a draft letter. I can contact the tribal liaison that's on that webpage and distribute it respectfully to whoever is interested to address that early opportunity for tribes to provide input. The reason I say broadly is the Duwamish frequently review and respond and comment to our project reviews. And they may not be a recognized tribe like the Muckleshoots, or they may have different relationships like the Snoqualmie. But I think this effort being not controlled by commerce or legislation and not being a government to government consultation, I think it's a very polite thing to do, and we can do it fairly early in the process.
Okay. So questions about those three objectives?
We have a raised hand.
Do it.
Oh yeah, he's goes.
Yeah, is it Yanni?
Yeah,
Okay.
just a comment on the third one. And so, yeah, it is often appropriate to reach out to all of the tribes in our area, depending on the issue. For example, working for King County, we reach out to 5 federally recognized tribes on a lot of issues, regardless of their location, if they involve cultural resources, meaning archaeological and things like that. On things like this, sometimes we reach out more narrowly. I'm not saying that's my advice for the city. I'm just basing that on my experience of how tribes tend to respond to local agencies updating code and things like that. So the template letter I sent could be sent to, you know, multiple tribes in the area, and that's fine. Or it sounds like, Mark, there's a vehicle for getting Commerce to do that for us through the liaison. All of that sounds good. I would caution you, though, as the city, from contacting Duwamish in the same way and at the same time as you contact federally recognized tribes. It is a very sensitive place, and you may well draw a lot of very sharply worded letters and things from federally recognized tribes if you do so. There's a lot of history there. It's not for us to solve, nor is it ours to fix with, good intentions. I'll just share what we do at King County. If we are reaching out to tribes, we reach out to the 5 federally recognized tribes that we deal with in the area. We get feedback from them. And then as we send out more public facing information through SEPA or to interested parties, whatever lists we have, we absolutely include the Duwamish Tribal Services Organization, which is the sort of representative of the Duwamish tribe, but we should not refer to them in the same way nor contact them in the same way. So that's just, I've been through this, and it can feel funny to us, those of us, especially if we see the various, real rent Duwamish and all these things. And I have tremendous respect for the Duwamish people and for the Duwamish Tribal Services Organization. They often do weigh in on issues that the county deals with, but they are not a sovereign in the way that the other tribes are, so they ought to be communicated with differently, but respectfully.
Got it, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I bring up the Duwamish because we get a comment letter from them every month. So in that sense, that to leave them out would be my worry. But granted, my first contact would be the tribal liaison because I don't want to stumble into this. So I'm open to any suggestions. But thank you for that input. That actually informs that conversation better.
Yeah, that's awesome, John. Yeah. So, okay, so let's come back to number 1, and then we'll come back to your letter or your draft letter. Yeah. Questions or discussion that thinking back to David's presentation at our last commission meeting, did any ideas did it spur for you or any discussion items that you wanted to bring to the table as a result of that conversation? I kind of had to go back and review a little bit of what he discussed. Just kind of David, he introduced some maps, some links to mapping or maps for, when people are thinking about particular ordinances, these are the maps that they refer to, including city maps, the Department of Fish and Wildlife, Lake Forest Park Water District, Lake Forest Park Stewardship Foundation, etc. And then he talked a little bit about the critical areas that are protected, such as wetland, frequently flooded areas. He had some quick code links, so he talked through each of those areas, and he talked about permits. Probably there's probably some other stuff, but that was what was top of my head.
There's one question that comes out. I think it was a very interesting presentation, seeing all these maps to kind of like layer up to see, you know, like when we think about like what's a built area in Big Forest Park, it's really interesting to see from the lens of that map. For the this is all new language for me. So RUE is what it's called, right? Like when it's like use extension.
Exemption.
Sorry?
Oh, exemption.
Exemption, yes. And so the when it is an encumbered property, you know, like knowing that it might, you know, like it could be for any reason. Maybe it's a wetland, maybe it's something, topography is part of the thing. There's a, you know, like there were some conversations that happened when there was there was a town hall that there were certain people who talked about how their properties were being affected and how some of the builders had gotten the RUEs, but it just went out of hand and certain things were not implemented. From a city's perspective, like, is that ever a thing? If it's a really encumbered property, it just city refuses for it to get built? Like, what happens in that? Or it's just that they have to like go through mediation and like there's hearing and then exemptions are given. Like, what happens in terms of like if we were to like really think about like long term, would it just continue with the process that exists today, or is it any change?
The easy answer is if we don't, it'll be costly.
To the city.
I'm not an attorney, but we can talk about it. The existing critical area ordinance has this exemption in there as a relief valve. It's required by law. Without it there, if we deny a project because it's encumbered by buffer and so forth, it's a taking. We have other sections in the code that say you cannot form these lots anymore because of critical areas, lot sizes, and so forth. But there are many lots that have been in existence for 100 years. That's done deal. So they have that legal zoning status, and if you deprive them of the ability to put something on there through a flexibility type thing, it's a taking. Then every city deals with it differently. They put the criteria in ours, there's guidelines. They give some input as to what would be acceptable in what situation. That all then gets collected, examined by the community into a staff report with a recommendation and goes to the city's hearing examiner, who's independent, sits as a judge, makes the decision for the local permit. So one side of that, to not have the RUE, you're going to be subject to takings actions. Very costly, much more costly than just buying these lots. And the attorney can advise you. I know that our current code has that and is based on conversations and exact wording from the city attorney in that regard. But you do have control. Some cities, very broadly, they don't have what we have: the topography, the wetlands, the buffers, the stream setbacks, and in the quantities and the pervasiveness. And so they have very less strong criteria. No real guidance as to what is a minimum development right. So it's left to staff and an applicant to then consider a radius, you know, 1/8 of a mile, 1/4 mile type radius, get an average of what the development right is for that area, and then propose that and nothing more. Ours is very specific with the idea of making it small. We have more critical areas and buffers than most cities have, so it's very unique. Then there's a section about guidelines that talks about 750 square feet with a garage. It's a guideline. There's the hearing examiner is the decision maker. My guess at why it says the word guideline is it provides guidance, but relieves us from the higher risk of a takings action. So it's in there and it provides input. It hasn't been in there relatively that long in comparison to the number of these lots that we have in the city. 4, 5, 6, 7 discussions or carryover since I've been here. So it's not very frequent. can't speak to the opinions or value statements about is it strong enough? Is it too strong? Is it working? I don't know. It is the code. So that's my position. I implement the code, make a recommendation, and the two that we are responsible for, we have very much identified the critical areas and headed towards what really is a justifiable minimum development right. And in my 2.5 years, that has not been tested by the hearing exam. The Gary RUE, which we are not talking about tonight on tape, is an example. He proposed, wanted to go to hearing. We prepared it. We made a recommendation for denial. I think I can say that. When we got to hearing, the applicant is the first opportunity to speak. He revised his project in that minute. We wish that could have happened before. It was remanded to the city. He's revised it. It was due to us by September. We also argued that don't hem us in on the review. Don't say a 60-day review, 90-day review. We don't know what we're going to get. And we were successful. So there's no time on when we bring it back to here. But that's why that's taking so long. It's smaller than it was. It's smaller than it could be under different rules, but it still has that relief valve so that we are not sued for depriving him of being able to build a single family unit. The other part of that discussion always comes up. What is a minimum development right? Every zone has a series of permitted uses, and minimum development right is I can build everything that's permitted. If it's a low density residential, a single family unit is your minimum development right of a size. And then every site has different circumstances. The critical area report comes in. Most common in most cities, you have a small development area that's outside of buffers and wetlands, and you get your RUE for that. In this city, we have smaller lots. Most often the entire lot is a critical area. And so that's where the RUE comes in. That's why our criteria are ratcheted down in comparison to some cities. So that's the overview. And I know it's more detailed than that, but I can clarify anything you need.
It's a good overview though. It's an issue that's confusing for a lot of people, especially the fact that a lot of these lots have been developed 100 years ago or whatever, and that's been a point of contention, at least in my experience, because developers come in and do what they do, but then they had the right to do it because of but the community doesn't want to look at it that way.
And Yanni has a
Yeah.
Yeah, just a process question, and I understand that tonight we're not discussing the substance of the Gary RUE, but my question is, so, okay, they're revising things. They have till September. Where does the public weigh in? Because it sure sounds like the most important argument that was raised in objection is not being considered yet, which had to do with actions the previous owner took to declare the property unbuildable, so, and get taxed accordingly. So I'm just curious, what's the public process now with that? And I do think for our discussion tonight, we heard about an RUE last month or whenever it was from the Muckleshoot tribe. They're paying attention. So what's the next process step on the Gary for the public?
The public part is never stopped. They didn't, every comment from the notice of application, the SEPA, the notice of hearing was transferred to the decision maker. Our recommendation was for denial. We addressed the findings that we needed to make. I can say the entire record was given to the hearing examiner. We do not know how he will weigh in on that issue. It's an argument that can be made. It's not being hidden and can be augmented. We will have a revised project that goes back. It'll be reduced. So there won't be another round of SEPA, but there will be a notice of public hearing, and we will take public comment all the way until he closes the public hearing. And I fully acknowledge that because the I'm gonna make sure I'm not going too far afield because we're not discussing the specifics. Because the project description was amended at the beginning and no public comment was taken, he was put in a hard place. He will have a full oral opportunity for anyone that wants to speak. And I can guarantee you, anything that we have already got in writing is already part of the record. Everything that we will get in writing up until John Gall tells us the hearing is closed will be transmitted to him. What I don't know from there is what he will feel or think about it.
So I would just request that, because we are, I think the RUE is something we'll want to take a close look at as we update code to see if there are any changes we think should be made. I want to make sure that the commission receives notice of public hearing on that item.
It'll be public knowledge, but I can't say I will specifically notice the planning commission because the planning commission does not play a role in that independent review. We are not hiding it. You're not parties of record, but we do news blasts and so forth. And so in that regard, we can keep it clean from that issue, but make it widely known.
And bringing it back to this conversation, Yanni, I think that you've said this before, is that we really should look at the RUE process as part of this conversation. So let's do that.
And I wasn't here for there's quite a history, right? And then newly adopted code for RUE. So that snapshot did exist. And I could say I'm newer than that. So in that context about what emerges from the other end, it may be beneficial for you to hear that same input from the city attorney, that balance and risk. And it's just legal advice, but I think it's important to consider if we're going to consider it.
So you're saying, Mark, are you saying that we could talk about, if we bring in the city attorney, we could talk about that as an example, not about the specifics of the case necessarily, but we could use it as a case study? No. Okay. No.
She could come in and give legal advice for RUEs. She cannot come in here and talk about the Gary application.
Okay.
Yamaguchi application, the two from before I was here, or another one, the Kava, which is incomplete, may or may not happen. Those are the 5 that I'm aware of.
Okay. So then could we invite the city attorney then?
That could be a good step if you want to focus on RUEs, get some legal background.
What do y'all think?
Yeah,
I like that.
that'd be great.
Okay, let's do that.
Okay.
August, I think, would be a good time. In case we're all out on July. Working remotely. We don't want to invite her to that.
And Meredith, that's what. The meeting, we're not.
I mean, I can be here with Meredith and their attorney. But that would not be a good.
Okay, that's good. So.
And I like that category of there are certain pillars that we do not need to wait for because this will not be a required element that we need amended. This sucks. So that it's never too soon to start down that track. Have a side conversation, a focused conversation on RUEs. There's no sense waiting for my checklist.
Yeah. Any other pillars like that? Your perspective. That are that distinct.
Not that distinct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Any other pillars that are a little less distinct?
The easiest one always is consistency with RCW and WAC, and they change definitions from time to time. It's just cut and paste. This is what it is now. This is, so we'll hit all those. Then it gets squishier. Then it's legislation put in place since our last update. Then it's the biggies, best available science, no net loss, ongoing things, and they get more stringent each round.
Yeah.
So the checklist has to be done. Probably some hiring of some technical expertise. Then we will touch best available science, no net loss, and so forth. Those are going to be the primary difference between what we have now and what emerges.
So when it comes to critical area ordinance, how does the city stay abreast, stay on top of best science, or like how do you do that?
Well, and that's part of the unknown. some would say we've always used best available science, but now it's codified. Now it's in the state regulation.
Right.
To give that guidance, and so we're conforming to some, whereas before it was more every agency was doing it slightly different. But every agency was required to get a critical area report based on this wetland manual and so forth. So there was some uniformity. What this round is doing is trying to shape all the agencies to be more consistent.
Okay.
So that's where the new definitions start, then the new criteria, then the advice on what is best available science, and now the mandate that you must adopt.
And does that checklist kind of give a blueprint for driving for that consistency, or?
It should, yeah. At the simplest terms, it shows what we don't already have in there, and then we need to get those words.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And have you shared that checklist with them? Like some of those items that are on that checklist? Like, what is it?
No, the checklist is the first step is, are you using the most recent checklist? And I admit I was racing out the door to go on vacation preparing this packet, but I've achieved that. This is the most current. And then there's links, there's criteria, but it's a very simple checklist. It's yes, no, whatever. But what it does is it identifies those gray areas, and then you go get that. You go to the legislation and pull that in. It's much more detailed than this checklist.
Okay.
But I think at that point we hire somebody that does best available science and not the Mark Hoffman version.
I'll just note, Councilmember Rosenau has his hand up.
Thank you.
Yeah, I actually had a conversation with someone today, but this had also come up in council comment at one point about a specific project that was getting critical area review. But the question came up of when things are filed, sometimes there is in the reports that the city gets, there is some sort of internal deadline attached to it. Like, this is not to be used more than 5 years or 2 years or whatever after the report was written. And there were questions about, is that something that the critical area code covers or mandates, how those cutoffs are reflected in the policy making, or not in the policy, but in the decision making, I should say.
Exactly, in implementation. Some cities are weak. I would suggest that's an area where we can make clear.
Yeah.
Our role is implementing with clarity and balance what is written in the code. Every time we have to guess where it's at, does it apply? How clear is it? Is it a should? How much discretion, in other words, or shall? And so if the amendments that we look at include clarity on how long an expert thinks a wetland delineation is good for, then staff would need a very clear sentence in the code to implement that says 2 years, 3 years. Some cities say it's at the discretion of the community development director, right? And I don't do that for a living. I implement code. So the more words that express the intent and provide clarity to staff are then conveyed to property owners and applicants. And I won't give an opinion about how clear our code is yet, but we'll explore it with you.
As an action item, so that would be something good that, could we like chunk that up? Like, if you take on, that's what you have to do it all in one weekend. So we could.
Oh no, yeah, that won't be.
Right. But
we're heading to a long laundry list, and I would offer at this point every word in the critical area ordinance is fair game.
Okay.
But at some point we'll need to narrow it down.
Okay. Okay.
You know what I mean? Like I would like to go away and do the checklist. The goal tonight is that you're aware of what it is and what we're doing, so that when there's weeks go by and you're curious, well, what's happening with critical areas, that I'm off doing this checklist. What's missing with the lens of Department of Commerce? Then I have the basics. Then from there, through time, develop individual issues such as critical area reports of this kind or that kind. go find the expertise that can inform you how long we should give them. It's out there. And so we'll get there. I think it's too soon for me to start remembering all the individual categories because that's at the level of wordsmithing. And so I would like to start broad, but I have the opportunity to start creating like a parking lot. And actually, as I'm talking, it's starting to make sense that that might be the first item on the parking lot.
Okay.
If that is acceptable to you. We may not work on any individual item in the parking lot at any specific time, but I could start capturing them.
Does that make sense to everyone? So while you're doing that, we could be inviting the attorney, the city attorney, to talk to us about our EVs.
I'll flag both those issues right now as the parking lot and then invite Kim for the RUE conversation.
Just looking at the screen.
And they are all different, right? Steep slopes doesn't change very often, right? It's not going to change every 6 months. And if it is, then it's third-party geotechnical review because it's a landslide. But wetlands change quickly and violations and so forth. So we'll provide input as to what all the categories are, what types of reports, and what the generally accepted lifespan, we'll call it, validity is.
So could we just kind of like target one area? Like, what if you begin with wetlands? Does that make sense?
Oh, I could do all 5 or 6.
Oh, okay,
Yeah.
okay. I mean, obviously, frequently flooded areas, it's not going to be that difficult. I don't think.
As far as how it is expressed for the FEMA flood rate map, it's very clear.
Yeah.
Our problem is more of localized flooding.
Right.
It's different than the 100 and 500 year floodplain.
Yeah. Okay. Okay.
But there's not that many different categories of critical areas, so we can grab the requirements that require a geotech or wetland delineation and start just talking about all of them. Okay. But wetlands would be the most shortest.
Okay. So, Yanni, you drafted a letter for everyone. I think Mark gave you each one of you the draft letter that Yanni put together. Anything you want to say about this, Yanni?
Yeah, just that, I meant it as kind of a skeleton draft letter. For example, some of the things that Mark just talked about, I put in kind of a placeholder sentence about we're going to start with reviewing the current code and, addressing any new requirements. That might need a little more explanation, right? Given just what Mark said about the checklist and things like that. What I find in my experience is that our tribal partners really appreciate when we help them target their time in reviewing our stuff. So not just saying, hey man, we're going to update this thing. You want to comment? But instead saying, we're going to update this thing, and the things that are kind of, popping out at us or things that we know we need to do are looking at how does this compare to the new guidance on X, or we know there's some energy around our reasonable use exemptions. It's, I think, respectful and helpful if we provide even little bullets about, from what we can tell right now, a few of the places where we're going to put some energy are these. And I would just, I don't want to, my point in writing this letter was not to micromanage it. It was to basically adapt an example from many, many letters that I've helped write for the county to say this is kind of the way to do it and who to reach out to. For one of the tribes, I mean, I have contact information for all the tribes in our area, but just kind of laying out the process, which is inviting comment before the public, offering a briefing if they want it. They likely won't, but they might. And just making it clear that we're reaching out to them while we're still shaping our own thoughts about what we need to do, so that they can see that, oh, City of Lake Forest Park is open to our input on their scope. Not just on details of what we've decided, but on like, what are the things we're gonna really look at? So that's my recommendation, and the letter could be, obviously it was incomplete. I had a lot of blanks in there, but it's the type of letter that we've sent countless times to our tribal partners when we're doing similar stuff. So that's all it is. So Mark, honestly, I would, think that you would probably revise some of the bullets and things, make them a little more specific. But it's just an offer of a template. Um, I think this is something we should be doing whenever we're updating something kind of consequential. Like code that's going to have a life of a certain number of years before the next update, that's affecting resources the tribes care about. So that's how I offer it. I'm not trying to micro edit it. I'm just offering a starting place.
That works. I understand what you mean by scope, but we certainly won't have draft amendments.
Correct.
We all agree that's too late. That's when we send it.
No, that's already too late.
That's
They're
already too
reaching
late.
out now to get their thoughts.
Yeah. And then the comment about send it too soon, like, hey, there's this thing we're about to do, but we don't know yet. Why waste their time? But I like what you said about input about the scope of our potential amendments.
Yeah.
I think that would capture it. And thank you for the template. I'll make sure, and I don't know when it would go out, but I agree staff should do it early, if that's okay with the commission. While probably before the checklist is even shared as a draft with you. But I won't portray it as just hey, we're just checking this box. We don't actually have anything for you to review. Stay tuned for next year. So I'll do it more as aimed as I can, but without indicating that we've selected any specific areas to focus on.
I think that's right. And I would just say last thing, Mark, I think if it's, if you're the one kind of sending it and signing it, it's appropriate to send it to their senior staff, which is what I provide in the letter. If on something like this, we wanted to have it get a little more attention and we wanted to send it to the chairperson of the tribe, then we would want the mayor to sign.
Yeah,
Okay?
exactly.
The other recipients stay there. Those are the right recipients for this kind of thing. But it's just a matter of kind of communicating at the right level. You're the right level to contact their most senior environmental staff.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm recommending in this case.
With my position, I've never addressed the tribal council.
No, you shouldn't.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you're addressing council, it should probably be coming from, the mayor or council chair or something, that kind of thing.
Perfect. Okay, and then I have 2 items in the parking lot.
Okay. Thank you. I think that's a good start.
We only need like 100 more.
Is there one more that we should put there?
No, there's notes, no net loss, and we need to develop those. Those are known. The checklist will point those out.
Okay, let's move on to item B, old business, affordable housing next steps and direction discussion. So. Next steps. Where do y'all want to start with this conversation? Yes.
So we've been talking a lot about affordability, right? And it's such a contextual word. It's such a contextual notion, even when we talk about like the price of our housing, right? Based on like, even in the greater Seattle area, where are you located, right? So in Lake Forest Park's context, do we want to even state what that really means, right? Because like we're trying to get to that by smaller housing, and then that's what we're thinking that would lead to affordability, that it's a smaller housing that a developer could develop, right? do we want to define that?
You know, I think that you bring up a good point because I, it seems to me what we're really discussing is middle housing.
Mm-hmm.
Affordability is something that we would all like to strive for, right? But it's really middle housing
Right.
that's what was mandated.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why we spent all this time updating the comp plan to meet
Mhm.
those requirements of middle housing.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm wondering if we do want to clarify our language and speak less about affordability
Yeah.
and more about middle housing.
Yeah, that makes sense. Because I think it could be very confusing. We can say affordability, but how are we going to ensure it? We can't put a price tag that's just gonna date very quickly, really soon, depending on like what happens around. And so and not even something that we can really do based on like what data. But I think middle housing, if we just frame everything as middle housing and then just, you know,
What do you all think? By clarifying the language that we're using, less
Yeah.
about affordability.
I mean, I agree in that I think our first kind of priority is, we agreed on option one, right? Where we're going to focus, which is to first review our existing code and see what obstacles there are for even implementing, like on the ground implementing the things that we already recommended, right? So I think it's good to say in that context that, one approach that we're looking at is offering housing choice, housing variety, including some smaller scale housing that we recommended in our comp plan, so it's not a mystery in that sense. So I think framing it that way is good. And for Hina and like Marty, we talked a lot about and I've been kind of a like broken record on the idea of separating the ideas of sort of capital A affordability, which has to do more with like bringing in, nonprofit housing organizations, building multi-unit, larger facilities with, state and federal support sometimes and making them tied to income. That is like affordability with a capital A. What we're trying to do is focus first, I guess, or at least also on just our housing variety, our housing diversity and size diversity. We heard that from Councilmember Rosenau earlier tonight. Like, so I think that's where our most fruitful space is, and we should kind of name it like, yeah, it's not all affordability. It's about implementing the middle housing recommendations that we already made, but they're not completely separate from affordability. They actually, like, if done right, if we sort of fix the things in our code that could help these things move forward, we should end up with at least, some houses that are more affordable than what the market supports today.
yeah, it's like a byproduct of this rather than the actual goal. Yeah.
More
Agree.
units for
Yeah.
a lot, yeah.
I mean, when you can say something that's 750K is affordable, that we're in a different space than we were a decade ago, and we're in a different space than a lot of communities. And it's still important, right? For things like what Councilmember raised about, seniors wanting to downsize, families wanting to stay in the community. It is affordability, or it's sort of more affordable than what the market produces with our current zoning, or like our current, not just zoning, but our current code and so forth. So that's, I think, what we can communicate, that this will help.
So within that framework, what are our next steps to review the code to make sure that code is meeting what we said that we will do?
Well,
So
go ahead, Hina.
I was gonna say, so the majority of like the code, like the language and all of that is like chapter 18, where it starts to state stuff for like, I can't even read my own notes right now. like things about setbacks, things about, like the height. And we talked about, like incentives as well, right? So like there's incentive to build in a certain way. So like I guess what I'm trying to get to is like we can clarify some of the language, but then also we talked about the incentive, like providing incentive, and it's like it's kind of tied to, because then it becomes like we start to think about the code as in the height. What if it's instead of like two uh independent houses, it becomes like stacked flats, right? So that then you start to play with the height, and then you give incentive to say, what if we change the setbacks and we incentivize with this lot, like this can potentially happen, but it's very contextual.
Yeah.
So I guess like that's what I'm thinking, like, do we want to do further clarification onto the code that is in chapter 18, or do we want to also start to like give some context of like if examples, or like in certain cases some of the setback conversation or that could change if instead of like building two houses, four stacked apartment or like stacked flats are there, things like that.
Yeah, so commissioners, tell me if, because so how I'm understanding this, based on what we agreed upon, is that incentives would come forth in option B.
Mhm.
What we're doing in option A is looking at the code, what gets in the way of middle housing, big, duplexes, ADUs, dives. That's what you're saying, yeah. But that doesn't mean that we can't put those conversations in the back burner, right? I mean, I think it'd be interesting if that comes up during our conversations. We should keep that in mind. We should come back to that. Those what could potentially be incentives in the future, because I think that there's interest in that. So we should, if we're doing that work, let's collect that
Yeah.
information.
Yeah, because we went from like there to incentive, and then like also talk about cottages, and
Yeah.
it was this thing of like, as I'm reading this chapter 18, which is very dense, and I'm looking through it, some of these questions were like, well, shouldn't we start to clarify language and add things about like incentives right here? And maybe yes, it is a second step once we
Yeah,
get to the
yeah.
first part.
So
of
it's
it,
not
but-
within our mandate
Yeah.
for option one.
Yeah.
Option one is just clarifying the language.
Yeah.
And the thing is, option one might not be enough to begin with. We find that without incentives, we still can't get to middle housing
Mhm.
then. But I guess that's, yeah.
That's what I was thinking. It just starts
Yeah.
to creep into,
Mhm.
or bleed into.
We just want to stay within scope, right?
Yeah.
And keep looking back at what our criteria is that we set. Does this meet our criteria
Mhm.
for the option one that we're discussing?
Mhm.
Or that we have on the table?
I'll just jump in. Got my hand up, but I know it's hard to notice that.
Yeah,
I think
just jump in, you got it.
one of the sort of cleanup type things that I am not completely clear on in terms of the details myself, but what I've heard from some local people with proposed projects in our city is that, okay, we approved cottage housing under middle housing. We already had some language that referenced cottages in our code prior to that, and there's just inconsistencies of definitions and things. And those to me are squarely option one. It's like if we don't have clarity about what we mean when we say that cottages are allowed, and a lot of jurisdictions for cottages have, sizes and other attributes that they define. And I think, again, I'm not an expert on our code. I haven't looked at it from the angle of a builder. Okay. But it sounds like we have some cleanup to do so that we're just being consistent with our goals and with the language of our code. That to me is squarely option one. It's got nothing to do with incentives. It's about definitions. about being clear about what we mean when we say cottages are allowed now. Well, what does that mean? How big are they? Detached, required, shared, shared outdoor spaces, pretty common. Sometimes required parking off street, sometimes is part of it, sometimes specifically not. So I feel like we have an obligation in having recommended that housing form, which is a little bit unique, to at least make our definitions clear, even if we're going to wait to get into the incentives discussion.
Yeah, I agree with Yane. I think, that feedback really weighed heavily on me when we were kind of considering options. And I thought Yane had shared that he had heard from someone, from a developer, that they don't even know where they can put the middle housing because our code is confusing on that point or ambiguous about that point. So, like, we spent a lot of time last month talking about option one. My vote would be we stick with that, because if we keep coming back to debate whether we're going to do option two, option three, like, we're not having a meeting next month. If we don't have a meeting next month, year's going to be almost over and we'll have no progress to show other than we've spent another year talking about what we ought to do. So my vote would be, if we want to make any progress here, we start working towards option one as we committed to do at the last meeting, and we come up with a plan for how we're going to get the inputs to identify where the code has cleanup issues like this, or inconsistencies like we've talked about, that might suggest that developers don't know where they can put the middle housing that we approved and spent a lot of work on. So that should be our focus now.
And with that being said, I think we were going to ask, one of the questions we would ask you, Mark, is do you see areas that are inconsistent for people when builders come to the city? They want to put in cottage housing or duplexes, whatever. What inconsistencies are you guys seeing that need to be clarified? And you don't need to answer that question right now, but that's perhaps.
So we're trying. The easiest way is to actually implement it over time, right? We have 2 applications. It's a learning curve. We knew it would be. We don't know every scenario. The code can't possibly anticipate every scenario. We get an application, it requires review, and it requires them to meet whatever code sections are applicable. That is the most detailed way to learn about what those gaps or lack of clarity are, and that'll take time. The quicker way is to reach out to people making statements like that and say, cool, instead of just saying that there's lack of clarity, why don't you tell us where you think you see it? Then I can go away and read it, give an interpretation, just like I'm considering an application. Every one of them will be different because the site's different, the lot's shape different, the road's different. Too many variables. But if we can get some input, this may be the time to invite a knowledgeable local developer that's interested in middle housing to explore that with us. Now that we've penned down what we would be asking.
And Shuri and Yanni kind of did some of that work with one developer already.
Yeah, or we talked to different people, and I'll just note that Councilmember has his hand.
Oh, thank you.
Oh,
Josh.
I'll just add to what you were saying. When I was canvassing, I spoke with someone who I believe Mark has had conversations with already, who wanted to apply the lot splitting part of the code and build a dadu towards it, the front of their lot, split that off, downsize into it, and then sell off the main house that they are currently living in. And by his account, I don't know if this is exactly right, but their lot was a foot too narrow in order to apply the way that those rules are written. That may be hyperbole in the moment, but that was how he described it. But that seems like the sort of thing also that I imagine would fall within the scope of option one as well. Just sort of making sure that it is possible to implement that where and an effort to or intention to apply some of those codes. And I assume you know who that is and can pass along information. If not, I can probably figure out what house it was and
Yeah,
close that loop.
I don't know. I don't recall anything where anything was put short. So that if they need assistance, please.
All right. Well, the story may have gotten twisted in the telling somewhere along the way, but I'll try to knock that door again and get him back in touch with you.
And then from staff's perspective, we went through middle housing in a very quick pace. We had a deadline, we did it. We addressed the whole spectrum. We didn't focus on cottages for 6 months. So we always knew there was going to be a learning curve. We would learn it as we implemented. If that's what's being mentioned as clarity, that's called project review, right? If you do 20 of those, just like RUEs, you can forecast better and give advice, but the burden is always on the applicant. They need to know the building code. They need to know the planning code. And they need to design it. Our staff doesn't design it, but we can pull scenarios. We have 2 cottages to learn from, but very small lots. The staff perspective is we will implement those and they will meet code. We see the biggest impediment is you can only do 2 units. So is that true cottage housing? So that part is known. But as far as the site constraints of, let's say, for example, an existing lot with an existing single family dwelling, and you want to do a cottage, that's called project review. If they're characterizing that as lack of clarity, that burden's on them. It's not a clean slate. So we could attempt to meet halfway, but I would appreciate that input because otherwise I'm guessing at what is clear. It's easier than last time because we were addressing all the types and just going fast. And if we hone in on cottage and give it some scenarios and get some feedback, we can have a pretty good conversation about those styles and what the impediments are. If it turns out it's land costs, if it's architect costs, energy code, sewer connection costs,
Critical ordinance.
critical areas of trees, that it shortens the list pretty quick about what the lack of clarity is. Are you going to pay a sewer connection? Yes. Or somebody else is going to pay it. Pretty clear, not an impediment. Can we wipe all that clean and ignore building code or connections or water and all that? No, we can't. But we can start to nail down our codes and inconsistencies and then give it a shot. I wish every lot were a clean slate, but every lot's going to be different.
I guess for next steps and to identify these, whether they're discrepancies or where we need clarity. Considering we're not going to meet in July, should we just go and read? I can start a document, like a spreadsheet, and we can start to like jot down things that we think, even for us reading in the first instance, that it just doesn't seem clear. So for instance, when I'm looking at the ADUs, my big question is like the trend is for people to like split the ADUs and then sell off that parcel, but then you have to think about, like egress and easement, like, but I'm not clear when I read that. I don't know. Maybe it is in there, but I just couldn't like get a quick sense of like what does that mean from an egress perspective? Because most people when they build ADUs, they build like, these ADUs as like someone, it's like a mother-in-law suite kind of thing. And then eventually things happen and they want to sell it out, but then what happens, So like if someone has a long-term plan of like, this is what they're going to do today, and then 5 years they're going to do something else, how should they think about that, and be prepared for it that, they could just sell it at different parts of like what Josh was talking about that. So it's just like, maybe things like that, we can start to like pick what those things are and then start to document it. And then when we meet, we kind of like can discuss and see where that goes.
So you're talking about really delve into the code ourselves.
Yeah, really delve into it, because that's what I tried doing, and I started reading, and like what I made sense of some things, and some things I was like, I have half a picture here. I don't know what happens next after this. And so And then like we can start to apply examples of like things that we probably know from the community or even on lot sizes to say like, how does this translate to? And then we can come back and have a discussion about it, maybe even comment into it. So I can put a Google Doc or something where we can kind of like work, asynchronously but together on that. So that might help.
Josh, did you want to add to that?
I just wanted to mention because I had mentioned the Leland report before, I did send an email while we're all sitting here with a link back to that, since I know there are a couple of members who were not on the commission a year ago when that circulated, and also a couple of other related documents that are part of the commission's record that do list some additional options for ways to address affordability and missing middle in the code. And I also wanted to ask, I know you all have a parking list of items that you had wanted to get to during that as Mark said, rushed process. Are there things that can be as at least a starting point for some of this discussion? Things that you really wanted to get to that didn't happen last year that could be easy jumping off points from the staff or the commission members who were there a year ago.
Yeah, one of them is minimum street frontage that Yane has talked about a lot, and that's kind of a key one that is an inhibition potentially to middle housing, and so we need to think about that in the mix. We've also talked about and having that parking lot, and I think it's less of an inhibition to middle housing development and more of a consideration along the lines of what Hina was talking about with respect to like setbacks, like side yard setbacks. We've talked about that a lot when, the development happens right on the lot line and can block out kind of, sun and light and stuff. So there are a few things like that we have on the parking lot that we should pick up as part of this. But I do like the proposal of just having a running list where we chunk in all these things that we've all heard and that we think are confusing when we take a fresh look through the code or inconsistent. And that could then help us refine and get a punch list of what are the things that we need to clarify.
And the document that Josh sent, that's the same one that you're talking about that was worked on previously?
I think what Josh sent is a report that was prepared by our consultants, Leland, and they had some other models, and levers to think about for affordable housing. So I think that it was less, they didn't really identify inconsistencies in our code. They were looking at examples from other states and other cities of what was done. And I think that's more of a, going back to David's point, like an option B or an option C thing when we look at incentives or other models, because my recollection from those discussions, and Yana and David may have a different point of view, and please chime in if you do, but they were ideas, but they would require kind of a whole kind of heavy new section to the code and funding and a program to kind of set up that's well above and beyond what we've committed to do last month.
It did discuss.
I mean, it does mention the street frontage is one of the items discussed in it, and there's a little bit of discussion of things like ADU location, allowing in the front yard, things like that that could fall within option one conceivably.
Got it. I was misremembering.
Yeah, no worries. And I think it is a good report if you haven't read it yet. It is good to read through it because they do make some important. It'll give you a big picture of what's possible or what they thought was possible based on what they learned about this community. Yeah. Okay. So we have a few minutes remaining still. So what if we did this? What if we, as you suggested, it's at our next meeting, whether that's July, if we move it up to August, it gives us a couple months to actually walk through that code, create a list, a running list for ourselves, bring it back, bring those questions back to the next meeting. And then Mark, you could determine if there's ways that you can answer some of those questions, or perhaps those are gaps that we do need to clarify.
I should mention I'm gonna miss the August meeting. So yeah, that time it'll be me.
But perhaps you'd be willing to do some of the work, or look through the code and then send it to your
Yeah,
questions
exactly.
later.
I'm yeah, definitely willing to collaborate. Yeah. Great.
Is that workable? Does that work for you guys? No? Okay. Okay. And so can we be specific about that? So that what section is this? Just so I never remember.
Title 18
Title 18.
Oh, I'd be calling it chapter 18, but yeah.
and the residential ones. For now, when you get into incentives, density bonuses, then it'll
Yeah.
involve the gateway.
So we'll do that later. Focus
Yeah.
on part the one.
Yes.
If you steam through 1 and get to 2 and 3, then the other zoning districts that are more commercial based but allow housing,
Mhm.
especially the gateway with multifamily housing, then like in option 3, those become. But right now there's 6. I don't know how to, after all these decades, I can't stop calling them single family zoning districts. Low density residential zoning districts and focus on those things for middle housing. But it's broader.
And I think we could go, and so when we come back, Sam, you created a list of questions for developers. Remember that list of questions? Perhaps we could share that out again and add to that list so that we can, again, if we're having conversations with people we know or developers, we could be also making that inquiry.
Yeah, I'll dig that up and recirculate that.
Okay.
With the whole group.
Yeah, there are a couple of developers that I work with as
Yeah.
residential interiors
Yeah.
space. I can always
Yeah.
circulate that. Yeah.
Yeah, and to Mark's point, we really want to ask those questions like, yes, like Sherry's colleague who answered some of those questions, he was talking about, well, let's do away with some of the clearable ordinances, area ordinances, or he did make a reference to something like that.
Which
That's
they're
one.
going.
Yeah, they're going to say that, right? Of course.
Opinions,
Yeah.
because
But
We're
what we-
building things.
yeah.
Yeah. But what we also really want to know is like what can we do with code that could impact our ability to build housing, like first of all.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And Sam, I don't remember the questions if they're that specific or if they can kind of get to those comments from a developer. I don't know, but
I think some of those things are also very general question of whenever you think about middle housing, and I think it's similar, it's similar conversation throughout Washington State. So especially in West of Washington, middle housing, what are the challenges that you face? And
right.
from a city's perspective, it doesn't even have to be just particularly Lake Forest Park. And I think some things will just spark a conversation there. So that could just help get to.
And depending on how local we can get, you can cure we can't talk about active applications by using words like conceptually, if this were the scenario,
right.
that way we don't run afoul of that, and we can be pretty specific.
Yeah, like conceptually.
Yeah, conceptually, if a lot had this.
If this, and perhaps that might be helpful, is to build those scenarios.
Yeah.
That's
right?
true. Yeah.
If this, then what?
And then the due process kicks in at some point. If you start talking about a specific site, a specific application, they have a right to be here, hear it. And that process is outlined in code. So we have to stay away from that.
Yeah.
But scenarios, conceptual, fair game.
Yeah. Okay.
So maybe we do two things. So one is reading the section 18, looking at the discrepancies, and maybe thinking about some scenarios, in another tab, what that might be, even if it's real. Yeah.
Anything else in regards to middle housing? So, actually, just one thing. So let's cross out affordable housing from now on and just say middle housing.
Yeah.
Okay.
One thing before we wrap up, I'll just I'm remembering an earlier discussion about having either groups or subcommittees or that using the there's no problem as long as you're below a quorum. If people want to have a little reading group and read together, that they may make it a little bit easier to move through the code, sit over a cup of coffee, and if fewer than four of you at a time get together and do that, that may be a little bit easier way to have some of these discussions, especially since some of you have been on the commission for quite a while and could help guide some of the newer members through conversations that have already happened or stickier situations before, in between, especially since it's going to be a 2-month gap.
One last, before we leave this, since last year to now, the question about do we invite a nonprofit representative that's in the business, or leave that for option 2 or 3? They could not talk about mental housing in our code. It's broader. Oh, it's ours. We're not in their sphere of influence, but there was talk with the past commission going into the complaint about inviting you in for advice. Now that you have identified mental housing in option 1, it may be too soon.
I was gonna say, well, it seems like something a little bit further down the road. So more of a fall thing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
after August,
Yeah.
yeah.
But let's definitely keep it in the
Yeah.
back. Let's keep it.
And that's the context I ask. I run
Yeah.
into them occasionally, and they need as much wording as possible.
Yeah, that was the other part. So if it takes a while to put it together, then absolutely make that approach. But yeah, it's something that we aim for. Yeah.
Yeah, I have a friend who's is part of a development, Twilla, amazing development, multi-middle housing, really cool stuff, but we'll keep that on the back burner.
Okay.
Okay,
Thank you.
yeah. All right, so new business?
No. Well,
Oh, that
yeah,
would
I'll
be-
move it to no new business.
Yeah, but what were you gonna say? Can that slip into reports and announcements?
Yeah, it's
Okay.
more appropriate for 11.
Yeah.
We have a new climate coordinator.
Oh,
She's in her 3rd week, Marita Davison. She lives locally. We have an opportunity now to finish that 3rd area. We did the climate action plan, which was more implementation. Then we did the policy and goals and vision to fill that gap, which should have happened first, but it was consistent. Now we're on the 3rd thing, which is let's do something.
yeah, wow.
Which is budgets, and it's the hard part. We're building a program. She's on board, and I'm looking for ways to introduce or make her presence known to start communication. So this Thursday, she'll be introducing just a grant concept at council, and she'll be very independent. We don't know what the program actually is. We know what the end result is, and so I'm trying to fill that program and get as much input as possible. We know about the Climate Action Committee. We know about the implications of the Climate Action Plan. Now we have a staff member to actually do these programs, meet with Kenmore, meet with Shoreline, build a program, lead to something that's successful, and it's never too soon to start. So I bring that up in the context of Planning Commission, because at some point there's crossover, there's a climate lens on everything. So that awareness that that program is up and running and we have that staff resource, it's never too soon. But when an item comes up, we can bring it to Planning Commission.
Does it make sense to invite her to just introduce herself at the next meeting and just
I'm open to
5-10 minutes?
Yeah.
Whatever.
Yeah.
Good.
Okay.
Yanni, I like the photograph that you just put up there.
It's funny. I actually was just like something was happening with my video, so I went to like look at what was going on in the backgrounds, and it added a different photo of mine, but that's fine. For those curious, this is from a small town in Finland, which is where I'm from. This town was founded in about 1300 or so, and they preserved this historic part of the town that's pretty darn cool. People used to do all their business by boat, so all these buildings have a little like service entrance out to the docks in the back, so people could pull up and do their shopping back in the day. So anyway, I wasn't trying to switch photos in the middle. I was just trying to fix my camera, but there you go.
Okay. Any other announcements?
Now, first step.
Okay. There are nobody is here for public comments. Agenda for that. Oh, go ahead. Drew.
Oh, no, I was just gonna say, nobody else online.
Okay, so we will have our next meeting in August then, right?
August 11th, yeah.
So let's look at dates for next meeting.
You're sure we'll do a notice of cancellation
Okay,
on
are we
the
certain?
website?
Are we certain, everyone?
Yes.
Yanni, Sam? Okay. Sorry,
Then,
Meredith.
August 11th would be the standardized second Tuesday.
Yeah.
But, if that doesn't work, we can look at moving it.
11 works for me.
Let works for me. That's the one day that does work right now, so.
End of summer.
It works for staff, so it's whatever you guys need.
Sam, does that work for you? The 11th of August?
Yes, it should.
Okay, and Yanni?
Same.
Okay. Hopefully it works for Meredith.
Yeah, she might appreciate a little bit more bringing.
Okay, and the agenda, well, we'll continue, we'll bring back conversation about, what did we learn from the code,
Yep.
doing our own research or looking at the code. City attorney. And perhaps, okay. Yeah, okay, and then we'll go from there.
And the new sustainability
Oh,
hire, should we ask them to?
Oh, thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, now that we're certain when we're needing nothing on easy.
Okay. Well, it's a little early, but shall we adjourn?
I'll move to adjourn.
Okay, second.
Aye.
Everybody, okay,
Thank you.
yeah, thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Good night.
Thanks all.
This is the thing to tune in, but I'm gonna be in Spain, and I think that's gonna be like 3 in the morning or something.